You step into this unspoken arena before you even realize it exists, the place where a woman's dominance does not require declarations or threats. It blooms in the hush between words. The moment your eyes linger just long enough to make him question what he saw there. In this quiet theater, every small withdrawal becomes a seismic event, every smile a currency. You feel the voltage of your presence when you walk into the room, how it stiffens his shoulders, how he rearranges himself, like a boy desperate for a passing glance of approval. You sense that he doesn't yet understand the rules, that he thinks love is something clean and symmetrical. But you already know that love, in this form, is laced with the same invisible forces that governed him as a child, the longing to please, the terror of being unchosen. You notice how quickly you become the silent axis round which he orbits, how your moods become the weather systems of his day. You start to realize you can tilt the horizon of his self-respect simply by withholding a fragment of affection, and as you observe this power flickering to life in your hands, you taste a thrill that feels both illicit and inevitable. It is a soft, luxurious sensation, like finding a hidden passage in your own psyche that leads straight into his most unguarded places. This isn't about cruelty, you tell yourself. It's about survival, about the primal need to secure your place in a story that often reduces women to supporting characters. But somewhere in your chest, you feel the electric recognition that you are already more than a character to him. You are becoming the mirror he holds up to measure his worth, the silent arbiter of his masculinity. And it dawns on you with the force of a quiet revelation. Dominance doesn't announce itself. It only requires that you stay a fraction more composed than he is willing to be. You see it in the flicker of his gaze, the way he searches your face for some sign that he is enough. And in that instant, you understand that this arena is not built from open conflict or stated intentions, but from the unsaid, the unconfirmed. The unrelenting space where power slides between two people like a blade hidden in the folds of silk. You begin to see how easy it is to slip your hand into the tangled roots of his psyche, to press lightly on old wounds he hasn't named. His projections rise to meet you before you even speak. He mistakes your poise for certainty, your allure for redemption. Every unmet longing he carries from the mother who withheld warmth, or the first girl who never looked back, now blooms across your face. You realize you don't have to lift a finger to become his ideal or his punishment. He has already furnished you with all the meanings he can't bear to hold himself. It becomes a quiet form of intoxication, this knowledge that you can shape his reality with a sigh, a pause, a subtle shift of your attention. You sense how your silence fills with his frantic narratives, how your absence becomes the proving ground for his worth. When he falters, you watch him search your eyes for absolution, desperate to believe you are still the sanctuary he projected onto you. And in these moments, you see projection for what it really is, a weapon disguised as devotion. You feel the flicker of guilt, the whisper that you are complicit in his confusion. But another voice, deeper and older, insists that this is the secret currency of intimacy, two shadows colliding and calling it love. You watch how he bends himself to fit the image he believes you require, never questioning whether it was ever yours to begin with. In this dance, you become both the mirror and the mask, reflecting his fears while concealing your own. And perhaps the most dangerous part is how easily you start believing the myth he crafts around you. You feel the heat of his projection settling onto your skin, like a velvet robe woven from his desperation to be enough. You catch yourself admiring the shape of this costume, how it flatters your hunger for validation even as it shrinks your true self into something ornamental. This is the unspoken seduction, to let his projections feed your own illusions of power, to pretend you are the answer to a question he hasn't learned to ask himself. You taste the quiet thrill of it, the knowledge that as long as he chases your approval, He will never notice he has surrendered the sovereignty of his own heart. You notice how quickly he learns to anticipate the texture of your praise, how he strains to catch the smallest fragment of approval slipping through your measured tone. It becomes a quiet choreography. He performs, you dispense your attention in precise, glittering increments, and, like a starving animal, he devours each morsel of validation, believing it is love when it is simply control disguised in sweetness. There is a softness to your power, a velvet glove drawn over the iron of your intent. You discover how effortlessly you can shape his confidence with a single approving nod or a withheld smile. You watch the way he lights up when you affirm him, how his spine straightens as if you have offered him the only absolution that matters. And in that moment, you understand that no force binds a man more thoroughly than the hope that he has finally become worthy in your eyes. You see the irony. The more carefully you ration your approval, the more he believes he must earn it. You become the measure of his progress, the distant lighthouse he is forever swimming toward, and with each new concession he makes another small compromise of his needs. Another stifled truth, he drifts further from his own center, tethered instead to your shifting appraisal. You sense the danger in this arrangement, how it tempts you to conflate influence with intimacy. But you can't deny the surge of power it offers, the thrill of watching him shape himself around your expectations. You feel the magnetic pull of his dependency, how it anchors your insecurities in a place that looks deceptively like devotion. It is a soft kind of conquest, one that leaves no visible scars but rewrites the architecture of his self-respect all the same. You begin to wonder who you are when you step out of this role, when you are no longer the judge of his worth. But for now, you keep your hand steady on the lever of approval, aware that he will do nearly anything to feel its warmth. And even as you ache for something real, something unburdened by power games, you can't help savoring how easily he surrenders to the promise of your next small blessing. You sense the quiet electricity that crackles between your hidden strengths and his unexamined softness, the way your unspoken masculine energy courts the wounded feminine within him. It is a collision that feels inevitable, your shadow pressing up against his animus, like two old adversaries meeting again in the dark corridors of the unconscious. You watch how his yearning for a nurturing force collides with your hunger to direct, to possess, to orchestrate the entire theater of connection. He doesn't realize that your dominance is not always loud or overt. Sometimes it emerges in your calm refusal to be conquered, in the way you remain unhurried while he spirals through his emotional weather. You catch the flicker of confusion in his gaze when you hold your ground, when you show him that your affection is not a commodity he can negotiate with displays of desperation. In these moments, you are not merely a woman in his story, you become the embodiment of everything he has disowned in himself. You feel how your assertiveness draws out his hidden passivity, how your self-possession becomes the stage onto which he projects the parts of himself he has never dared to integrate: the strong woman, the unyielding mother, the sovereign lover. You see his animus taking shape in your silhouette, and part of you wonders if he even knows he is surrendering to his own reflection. And still, some tender corner of you mourns how easy it is to let this dynamic script itself. You sense how the two of you drift into predictable polarities, each becoming an exaggerated version of the other's secret fears. He becomes more boyish as you become more imperial. He grows more malleable as you become more exacting. It is a dance you never quite agreed to. Yet here you are, moving in lockstep. You think about what it might cost to step out of this choreography, to release your grip on his identity and face your own naked longing beneath all the strategy. But for now, you stay in the script, feeling the heat of your hidden masculinity flare against his yearning, and knowing that this collision will always be easier than the unguarded truth. You watch yourself push against the edges of his composure, testing the tensile strength of his boundaries like a craftsman inspecting the grain of a new material. You sense that somewhere in him, there is a line he has drawn, a last defense of self-respect, and you feel the temptation to lean against it just to hear it strain. It isn't malice that drives you. It's curiosity, a hunger to know exactly how much of himself he will yield before he begins to fracture. You notice how subtle the provocations can be. A question posed with surgical precision, a moment of sudden distance after a night of closeness, an observation about his feelings spoken with just enough softness to disguise its incision. You watch the way his jaw tightens, the way he swallows, what he longs to say, and you feel the familiar, tingling certainty that you are in control. It is a private, intoxicating pleasure to see that you can pull the thread of his certainty until it unravels at your feet. He doesn't always recognize the test for what it is. Sometimes he interprets your challenge as passion, your critique as guidance. You feel a flicker of dark amusement watching him convince himself that if he only tries harder, you will lower your exacting standards. But deep down, you know this, the point is never really to have him succeed. The point is to see how long he will keep bleeding for the chance to prove himself, and yet, even in the midst of this game, you can't escape. The quiet ache in your chest, the part of you that wonders if there is any version of love untainted by this hunger for leverage. You remember moments when you, too, were the one tested, when you bent past your breaking point for someone who made your approval the price for your surrender. And you feel a shiver of recognition. This is how the cycle perpetuates itself, handed down like a secret inheritance from one wounded heart to the next. Still, you press on. You trace the edges of his tolerance with the delicacy of a sculptor shaping clay. You note each tremor in his voice, each tightening of his breath, and as you test the threshold of his entrance, you glimpse the unspoken truth. Dominance is never merely an act of conquest. It is also the mirror that reflects your own craving to matter so much that someone would let themselves be remade in your hands. You notice how easily softness becomes your most strategic disguise. The silk veil you drape over the iron machinery of your need to control. You understand that if you appear open, pliant, tender, he will lower his guard and let you deeper into the unguarded corridors of his heart. So you master the art of appearing vulnerable while remaining entirely intact, never truly offering the parts of you that could be wounded in return. He looks at you in those moments of carefully rationed softness and believes he has discovered your truest self, the tender girl beneath the composed woman. He doesn't see that you are still holding the ledger in your mind, recording each concession, each word he offers like tribute at the foot of your quiet throne. You sense how desperately he wants to believe you have finally surrendered your power, how much he craves the illusion of mutual exposure. But you never entirely step into the circle of his trust. You always leave one foot planted safely outside. You feel the thrill of his relief when you let your voice grow quiet and your gaze soften. The way he reaches for you with the reverence of a pilgrim certain he has glimpsed something holy. It almost makes you believe your own performance. This merge of vulnerability. You start to wonder if perhaps you could simply stay here, cloaked in this tender fiction, forever unthreatened by the raw chaos of real intimacy. But there is always the moment when he leans in closer, hoping to touch what he thinks you have laid bare. And you feel the silent recoil that betrays you, the small, invisible withdrawal that reminds you both. There is still a line he cannot cross, a final truth you will never offer. You taste the bittersweet certainty that no amount of adoration can dissolve this distance you maintain as proof of your sovereignty. You sense that this is the most exquisite form of dominance, the kind that leaves him grateful to be held at arm's length, convinced it is mercy rather than calculation. You watch him search your face for evidence of something real, and part of you aches to give it to him. But the rest of you knows, the moment you let yourself be fully seen is the moment the entire structure collapses. And you would have to face the question you have spent your life outrunning: what if love isn't a battlefield to be won, but a surrender that strips you of every illusion you've ever crafted? You learn how absence can become the sharpest blade, how the simple act of vanishing leaves him tangled in a labyrinth of doubt. When you withdraw, it isn't a flinch or a retreat, it's a precise maneuver, honed by instinct and repetition. You feel the power crystallize in the silence between messages, the hours he spends replaying every word, searching for the hidden transgression that earned you distance. He believes he can solve it if he tries hard enough, if he rewinds the last conversation in his mind until he finds the invisible fault line. You watch from your quiet remove as he exhausts himself with apologies, rehearsing ways to win you back to warmth. The irony tastes almost sweet how simply disappearing can make a man offer confessions you never asked for, sacrifices you never named. You sense that a part of you is gratified by his confusion, the way it proves your hold over him is as complete as you feared. And maybe that is the part you don't want to examine too closely: the small, hungry creature inside you that feeds on this imbalance. You pretend you are only stepping back to gather yourself, to reflect, but in truth, withdrawal is your most elegant method of control. It requires no raised voice, no accusation, no open threat. Just the echo of your absence filling the space where certainty used to live. You remember the first time you discovered this power, how intoxicating it felt to watch someone unravel in your wake. How easily you convinced yourself that you were simply protecting your boundaries. But you see now that withdrawal can also be a performance, a way to ensure he never stops proving his devotion. You recognize that every time you vanish without explanation, you are planting a seed of self-doubt he will carry like a stone in his gut. And yet, even as you savor the precision of this tactic, you feel a thin blade of loneliness slip between your ribs. Because the more often you withdraw, the more impossible it becomes to step back in without revealing the truth, that all this orchestrated absence is a shield against your own terror of being truly me. You understand, finally, that dominance through disappearance is a hollow victory. It leaves you standing alone in the citadel of your own making, surveying the ruins of connection you were too proud to trust. You feel the slow, sweet intoxication of becoming the canvas he paints his unlived stories upon. He looks at you with that wide, fervent gaze, and you sense that he no longer sees the woman standing in front of him. Instead, he sees the promise of redemption, the fantasy of a love so complete it will rescue him from himself. You recognize the seduction in this, how easily his projection becomes your throne. He speaks to you as if you hold the key to all his locked chambers, as if your approval can absolve the shame he never confessed to anyone. You hear his voice tremble when he describes the future he believes you can create together, a future stitched from the threads of his longing and stitched onto your form. And for a moment, you almost want to believe in it too, because being crowned the queen of someone's transformation feels like proof that you matter, that your presence alone is enough to rewrite another human being's story. But you also feel the subtle dread curling beneath your ribs, the awareness that his devotion is a double-edged blade. The more he projects onto you, the more he empties himself into your image, and with every dream he places in your hands, you feel the unspoken demand that you become the fantasy he cannot live without, that you suppress your contradictions, your jagged edges, your inconvenient truths to maintain his illusion of your perfection. You think of the moments when he looks at you with that shining hope and realize he is worshipping a fiction. You sense how projection is both a gift and a curse, a gift because it grants you power over him without any effort, A curse because it requires you to disappear behind the mask he has fashioned from his need. And there is something so exquisitely sad about this transaction, that the very mechanism that binds him to you is the one that will eventually betray you both. You start to understand that his adoration is not love, it is a desperate plea to be completed by someone who will never abandon the role he has assigned her, and as you watch him press his unlived potential into your hands, you feel a flash of grief for the parts of yourself that will have to wither to keep this fantasy alive. You realize, with a shiver of clarity, that the most seductive lie you can ever accept is the one that says you are the answer to someone else's unfinished story. You feel the paradox tightening round you like an elegant snare. The more you insist you are simply giving him what he wants, the more you realize how completely you are controlling the narrative. You dress your dominance in the language of care, in the sweet lilt of reassurance, in the promise that you are here to help him become his best self. But underneath it all, you sense the quiet satisfaction of having him dance to a song only you can hear. You watch how he confides in you with the tremulous hope of a man who believes he has finally found someone to cherish all his hidden pieces. You lean in, eyes soft, voice low, and you tell him you see him. You tell him you believe in him, and even as the words leave your mouth, you feel the slight twist of irony, that every expression of faith you offer becomes another tether, another invisible rope binding him to the version of himself you prefer. It feels almost noble at times. This caretaking, you convince yourself you are simply nurturing him, tending to the wounds others left behind. But late at night, when you can no longer outrun your own honesty, you admit to yourself that you like it how he looks at you as if you were the axis of his becoming. How your praise can buoy him or break him. You feel the thrill of knowing that no other woman occupies his mind the way you do. You are his confessor, his muse, his secret sovereign. And yet, in the quiet hours, you also sense the grief that underlies this power, because you know that the more he depends on you for validation, the less of himself remains intact. You see how quickly he sacrifices autonomy for the promise of your devotion, how readily he trades his discernment for your approval. It is dominance in its most seductive disguise, so well camouflaged that even you sometimes forget you are holding the reins. You wonder what it would be like to love without all the quiet negotiations, without the constant measuring of who holds the upper hand. But you have learned to survive by mastering this calculus, and the thought of laying it down feels as dangerous as any betrayal. So you keep offering your devotion in carefully rationed doses, telling yourself it is love when, in truth, it is a kingdom you rule from behind a curtain of tenderness. And in the flicker of his grateful eyes, you see both your triumph and your loneliness reflected back at you. You feel it the moment the illusion begins to crack. The first hairline fracture in the exquisite machinery of control you've spent so long perfecting. It happens in the smallest gesture, question you can't answer without stripping away the mask. An unexpected clarity that floods your chest when you catch your own reflection in the glassy surface of his gaze. For a moment, you see yourself as you truly are, not the sovereign queen of his devotion, not the tender redeemer of his wounds, but a woman who has hidden behind the safety of her dominance because she could not bear the risk of being ordinary. You realize you have become addicted to the theater of it, the rituals of withdrawal and return, the elaborate choreography of praise and punishment. You sense that this elaborate game has shielded you from something raw and unnameable, a part of you that still believes love is earned through mastery rather than surrendered to with trust. You watch how easily you have confused being indispensable with being loved, and a slow, almost nauseating understanding dawns. You are no freer than he is. He looks at you across the quiet space you have built between you and for once, you don't sense the usual desperation in his eyes. Instead, There's a question simple and terrifying. Who are you without the performance? You feel your throat tighten because you have no ready answer. You have spent so many years refining this persona that the thought of laying it down feels like stepping naked into the cold. But beneath the dread, there is a flicker of something cleaner. Something almost hopeful, a glimpse of the woman you might become if you could release the need to be adored at any cost. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that dominance is a spell you cast not only over him, but over yourself. It numbs the ache of your own unmet hunger, gives you a role so intoxicating you almost forget you invented it. But here, in the hush after the last performance, you feel the edges of your longing press against your ribs, your longing to be loved without the armor, to be chosen without the script, and though you don't know how to dismantle this machinery overnight, you sense that the first step is as simple as it is excruciating: to stand still, to let the masks fall away, and to meet each other in the blinding, beautiful uncertainty of truth. You stand at the edge of the old architecture now, surveying the ruins of every performance you once believed would keep you safe. Perhaps the hardest revelation is that no amount of dominance, no sequence of perfected gestures can ever substitute for the raw clarity of simply being seen. This is the paradox you laid bare, that your shadows are not just the ugly parts you hide, but also the beautiful and guarded truths you are too afraid to claim. You have learned how to weave devotion into a net of power, how to dress control in the velvet of affection. But here, in this moment of wrecking, you can feel your sovereignty pressing up against the brittle shell of your illusions, ready to break through. There is no tidy ending, no final triumph. Only the choice to step beyond projection and into the honest, sometimes terrifying terrain of individuation. To stand as your own witness and ask yourself the question you have so long avoided. Who are you when the throne dissolves and no one is left to crown you? If this reflection stirred something in you, if you recognize your own quiet hunger in these words, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Like, comment, and subscribe for more explorations of emotional boundaries, projection, and the courageous work of becoming whole.